everybody, American Prestige viewers. We're here on our YouTube channel, as we are every Tuesday. And we are joined this time around by Spencer Ackerman, repeat champion, welcoming back to the show. He's, of course, the proprietor of the Forever Wars newsletter. He also writes for Zateo. Spencer, thank you for coming back on the program. And I guess the question to ask is, when are we all going to wind up at Gitmo under the new regime?
Well, I was gonna ask about his workout routine. Look at those guns.
That's right.
The
We're
shoulders. Ooh, I'm
you're
distracted.
it's incredibly hot where I am, and in order to record this, I have to turn off my wheezing window air conditioner unit. We're keeping this one not just casual but potentially provocative.
Not
Nice.
just casual, but
calm down.
sexy.
Nice.
But yeah, if you know, it so happened after the Snowden leaks back when I worked for the Guardian, that for 6 years, as it turned out, I was put under surveillance by the British government. So for a lot of you guys out there, welcome, first time. Yeah.
So-
Guantanamo Bay, yeah, probably a little bit, maybe by year 3 of Trump 2.0, but we'll see.
So, Spencer, I mean, I've just got so many questions about this, especially.
Maybe we should start with the basics, like the
Yeah, that was. I was
conference
going to
that
ask the
we're talking
basics.
about it,
Yeah.
yeah.
What are the basics?
yesterday.
Yeah.
Like, just to give people the headlines here.
On a very heavily telegraphed road, the Trump administration has taken significant escalatory steps in aiming the war on terror at the American left. Last week, by the time you see this, but yesterday, for the time we're recording it, Secretary of State and apparently Viceroy of Venezuela, National Security Advisor Plus, Marco Rubio, convened an international conference on what they called political terrorism, which is to say an attempt at redefining terrorism as violence or activism committed by the American left, which is now, by the Trump administration's telling, an international network. And that's why they're roping in all of these other countries for assistance on what's just like clearly and very obviously, I don't really think we need to spend a lot of time refuting this, a pretext for crushing the left. This was basically done in order to unlock the real unfettered powers of the war on terror, which come from finding an association to a foreign terrorist organization. In the United States, there is no domestic terrorism law, so there aren't organizations that can be designated as domestic terrorists like there are foreign terrorist organizations, which, when designated, immediately become widespread targets for surveillance, for asset freezes, and the basic absence from the American banking system, as well as far more punitive measures, potentially up to and including arrest, detention, and, as you know, you're seeing from ICE with also increasing frequency shortly after the days after we're recording this, lethal sanction. So that's really the, you also, I guess the other thing that I would say by way of introducing this is weirdos like Stephen Miller also wanted to talk about violence from the left in civilizational terms, that they must do this or Western civilization is in danger. And they're vowing that additional foreign terrorist organization, FTO as it's known, designations are coming.
So, I mean, this partly goes back to Trump declaring a few months ago that Antifa was a domestic terrorist organization, which didn't work on two levels. One, Antifa isn't a thing, and two, there's no such thing as a domestic terrorist organization in American law. So this is, I guess, their way around that, right?
Yes. There are lots of coercive, intrusive counterterrorism measures that the FBI can take without those, explicit designations. If you go to, maybe we could put in some kind of show notes. I did an interview last year after NSPM 7, which we can talk about, came out with Terry Albury, the former FBI counterterrorism special agent, who became an FBI whistleblower when he no longer could morally justify the things he had been doing after 9/11. So there are, additional, there are lots of other, financial and other surveillance measures that can be taken. You just saw the Prairie Land demonstrators getting charged with terrorism-related offenses. People who were trafficking zines got hit with essentially like terror. There's also another thing called terrorism sentencing upgrades, which are different in this case. But like seeing like the shocking, decades long sentences that these protesters received because they were at a protest where a weapon was fired at an ICE officer, gives an indication of what they can do without a foreign terrorist organization designation. But when they have one, then it's the NSA that's using really unfettered powers of surveillance against these organizations. The designations itself are said to be are, I think it's pretty obviously absurd, but that never stopped anyone. And the question would immediately become, you can't know when you're under this kind of surveillance, so you don't have the opportunity to challenge it in court. You won't be found to have had standing. This has been an issue with people who have been under mass surveillance as a matter of policy, but not specifically named as such, going back for the last, more than 15 years. Such lawsuits have been lodged and rejected by the courts. So this is really an ominous milestone.
Yeah, there's a lot here. I mean, this is why I think many people on the left have always had a problem with terrorist as a designation in and of itself. It is so capacious; it could basically be applied to anyone. The irony here is that like the job was already done in the late 40s and early 50s in terms of institutions. The left was essentially uh, kicked out of American life, kicked out of the unions, kicked out of the government, kicked out of effectively the New Deal coalition, which allows this leftist category to be broad. I mean, the first question that I want to ask Spencer, though, is there's been there's been a tendency in Trump 1 and also in Trump 2 for these grand declarations to be speaking in civilizational terms, and not much winds up coming out of it. I mean, you even had similar civilizational terms in a different register under Biden with the democracy versus authoritarianism framework, and not much really came out of that. So on one hand, the war on terror institutionalizes all of these things that are now on the books and anyone could effectively use it. But on the other hand, what would this look like in practice? What would Stephen Miller be doing? And is this quote unquote realistic? What could be expecting here? Obviously, you were just talking about the protesters who did get absurd sentences. But
Yeah.
is there a structural issue here? I mean, the U.S. government has long given long sentences to environmental activists and things like that. But yeah, I think you get what I'm asking here broadly.
Yeah, I think what you would be seeing is, first off, Cold War culture, war on terror institutions and tools. I think you really have a kind of perfect culmination in that now. You also have individuals like Miller, like White House counterterrorism czar Sebastian Gorka, who view the American left, the socialist left, as the main enemy, the work of a lifetime, is building up to this, and they are in the relevant positions of authority. One thing that I think you can look at that will show their seriousness, in addition to what happened with Prairie Land. Right now, there's an extradition case that the U.S. has lodged with Spain for the heir to, or one of the heirs to, the Cox Communications fortune, someone known as Fergie Chambers, who is a noted benefactor of Palestinian causes. And right now, they are attempting to charge him with material support for Hamas. So that, I think, is an indication of where this is going to go. The easiest route, particularly given extant patterns of NSA surveillance, ostensibly foreign focused, is going to be to target the institutions associated with Palestine. One of the things that, and with supporting Palestine in the United States, one of the things that you hear a lot of, that was in, for instance, the White House counterterrorism strategy that Gorka wrote and released in May, I believe, is something they like to call the Red-Green Alliance, which is supposedly the alliance that they see emerging between the left and Islamist organizations. To a great degree, this is a fever dream. There is a whole lot of levels of historical irony when looking at actual left-wing movements in the Middle East that got, thanks to the Cold War, destroyed and replaced with Islamist movements. But the way in which it's easiest and most efficacious to make the case for such a thing that exists using punitive measures will be Palestine, will be a support for Palestine that's both rising in the United States, not only on the left, but also has established ways of tying into international networks of support for the Palestinian cause. I would not. I do not think that this is going to go the way of Biden's kind of absurd and, for lack of point missing, democracy versus authoritarianism challenges. The ideological aspects of it will change, but also you also have this moment where the major AI and surveillance capitalist enterprises, corporations, figureheads, and so forth like to talk also in these terms of the utilities of what they offer, and as well the rationales for their existence are not merely making money or offering an experience like others in Silicon Valley. It's to help. This is what Alexander Karp says. This is what Peter Thiel says. Western civilization defend itself, and defend itself especially in the Middle East as it relates to Israel and Palestine. So I think this can take a lot of forms, and what we tend to see is a lot of experimentation, some of it farcical, some of it successful, and I would expect that to happen in this case as well.
So, Spencer, your piece on this on yesterday, well, it's yesterday as we're recording this, on the summit that Rubio hosted, is "The War on Terror Approaches Its Final Form." You've been covering this for a long time now. Was it always headed here? Like, barring some intervention by let's say, a Democratic president who knows better, and I'm not pointing at anybody specifically, although he just put his library up in Chicago. Was it always going to wind up at this point?
Always was, and you can look at this at across a variety of axes, but from the very beginning of the war on terror, the discourse around it, including from the White House as well as its allies, was always that the terrorists were in some important way aided by political opposition in the United States, and especially the institutions of liberalism, the Warrens of liberalism. Lawyers, always a target. Civil liberties groups, always a target. They were the ones who were standing in the way of victory in the war on terror. They were unreasonably dividing the public to be sympathetic to these causes, and starting from efforts to go after attorneys. Really, at the very beginning, you saw in a different political context. We are at a far more mature and normalized phase of this, but visible at the beginning, you saw antecedents of this. Similarly, with immigration, from the very start, you had people on the right. Bill O'Reilly, I think, like less than a month after 9/11, was doing pieces on how these were open borders and the hijackers came into the United States legally, and that was a scandal. Um, and that has led to what ICE is right now, executing people on the streets of Houston, on the streets of Biddeford, Maine. And those will be forces that will also go after the left. This is an administration that, whatever our critiques are, in terms of outlook that tries to focus more on class than on racial identity, that ain't Stephen Miller. That's not how Stephen Miller and Tom Homan look at the world. They're trying to create a United States that is white as possible, and this is, rather very naturally the outgrowth of the trajectory of the war on terror. Stephen Miller, from as far back as his college days, as an activist against Islam for one of the David Horowitz organizations, has had the stamp of the war on terror on him specifically. There are so many of these cases throughout the administration, both the first term and this one. Sebastian Gorka, formerly a kind of figure of fun because of his bombast. This is someone who has been rooted in U.S. military institutions like Marine Corps University, lectured to the FBI. I've reported on those lectures and the quality control often seen, but is another figure empowered by the war on terror, going back a fair long way.
And
So
maybe we could,
wait, very quickly, Derek. So
yeah.
we would expect then, Spencer, for an uptick in cases prosecuted. That's what this will be, primarily judicial, like the targeting of specific people and then cases brought against them. What would it look like, you think?
I think you're not going to know that for a while, because the first way this works is surveillance, and that kind of investigation doesn't necessarily bring a case very quickly. It is waiting to see instead what a network looks like. So I think it will look like surveillance that will be difficult to necessarily bound, that will extend paranoia. And that's by design. The language of the May counterterrorism strategy is like pretty reminiscent of COINTELPRO. The way the FBI did this in the 1970s, part of it is to sow distrust within organizations, as well as, by design, this kind of surveillance, eats away at freedom of association. So you can be held liable for things that people elsewhere in this network, possibly not even a single organization, have done or are suspected of doing. The kind of latter stage of that, maybe prosecutions like we're seeing with this guy Fergie Chambers, and quite possibly as well, notices from financial institutions that they will not. I think this is something that you might see pretty quickly with legal organizations, particularly those that defend Palestinians, possibly defend refugees. I would wonder about the people who are providing legal services for Mahmoud Khalil. Organizations like Palestine Legal may have this come after them. Notices that financial transactions can't go through, or simply that banks and other financial institutions won't incur the risk of coming up under sanctions, coming up under them. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be an affirmative state action against a specific organization for something like this to take effect when it has to do with banking.
Maybe we could it makes sense to put this step into context of some of the other things that the Trump administration is doing. And this is a wide-ranging list of things, everything from having, the four uh, big tech oligarchs sitting dutifully front and center at the inauguration to, arranging for CBS and CNN to wind up in the laps of, Trump devoted Zionist billionaires. To investigating nonprofits, to wrangling these loyalty oaths out of universities and law firms. Just a whole array of things. You mentioned NSPM 7. That's another part of this. Like, what's emerging here as you watch this in terms of just constructing an architecture of an enemies list and how and ways to go after those enemies?
I mean, I would just see it as the architecture has been built by the war on terror. It is now being re-aimed. There are elements of the aim that had existed in the past. Palestine is the important nexus, but now it's going after more and varied targets. And outside of that, or in addition to that, and supplement to that, you also have ICE's emergence as functionally a death squad, as a lawless entity with the power of life and death that will go after the targets that the president and his allies want targeted, and call that immigration enforcement, call that simply law enforcement, and with lots of tools like the 287G partnerships that deputize county sheriffs and local law enforcement into that service. You can really have this network basically. Something that I found to be like a pretty trenchant critique. A whole lot of people I know with military experience around the time that like the Marines were going to Los Angeles, were facing like real questions about like, is this the end of civil military relations up to this point? Is this the end of and you can argue about whether this actually would be the end or what steps took before it, but of civilian control of the military and a depoliticized military, and a lot of the responses that came back were, what you're really looking at is something like ICE that doesn't have any of that institutional tension to fray out of at all, who will do the things and are empowered to do the things on American soil that will result in someone up the chain of command of any unit that's ordered to do these things having at least some measure of friction.
So just to clarify, the worry that like most extreme version is that ICE essentially becomes an arm of enforcement for an anti left wing politics,
Yeah, and that
effectively.
can go through. So NSPM 7 specifically orders the 55 or so joint terrorism task forces around the country that unite ICE with the FBI, with the DEA, with local law enforcement all around the country on priorities like basically going after the left. The NSPM 7 list is like really absurd and overbroad, and says things like, going after anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, extremism on migration, race, and gender. Like, you can really like go through a whole lot of this, but those are targets for investigative resources to be devoted, and that will be the first phase of how this unfolds. Where it ultimately goes, what countervailing force it meets, what sense internally of what is too far is to be determined, and will be determined by the kind of resistance that has ultimately going to either coalesce or not coalesce.
So
And with that, I've answered all your questions, and I
yeah,
appreciate it.
no, Danny, did you want to ask about what?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bunch more questions. So, first of
Yeah.
all, like, what is the left here? I mean, this to me is the biggest thing,
Yeah,
which in a political culture where that word is essentially meaningless. That's the thing. Is this just pick your enemies and they're the left? It's
I
Antifa.
think
It's Center for
so. Like,
American Progress.
yeah, I think like it's go. Matt Bors has a funny cartoon about, like, I think this was back in like 2017 or 18, when he had envisioned like a Trumpist concentration camp, and there are two people there. wearing the stripes, and they have an L on their chest, and one of them looks at the other and goes, "Well, my L is for leftism," and the other one goes, "No, your L is for liberalism," and they fight over that. But like that's going to be, the sense of what the left is will not be accepted by anyone on this podcast, will not be accepted by anyone listening to this podcast, and so forth. But it's going to be the way Stephen Miller defines the left, which means like the Ford Foundation, like network.
Right. Center for American Progress is the
The Center
left.
for American
Yeah.
Progress, the Open Society
Right.
Foundation, the major sources of like transnational or giant domestic international giant domestic funding for civil society, the Warrens of liberalism, but also protesters on behalf protesters on behalf of Palestine, protesters against ICE. I would especially expect that. You saw like on social video the ICE agent from Minnesota being like, "Smile, you're now in a database of suspected domestic terrorists," that the DHS keeps denying exists, and I would strongly doubt that. That's kind of what we're talking about. Something that can be the vagary is just capaciousness.
Right. And then this leads to a bunch of questions, and you could just take wherever you want. So, like, obviously, the big problem with ICE is that it was supported by both political parties, which is sort of the defining characteristic of liberal institutionalism in its moment of decline, is that it doesn't
And not
realize that
what,
these
but
things.
is currently still.
Yes, correct. And so that's
I mean,
something.
all of these things have been supported by both parties. Like
Right.
Yeah,
even the idea of targeting the pro-Palestine movement has support
Yep.
in both
absolutely.
parties.
It
Like
was under Biden with the college
we're not
protest.
at the point
Yeah.
where they're tripping the big firewall where Neera Tandon's going to put out a flashing red light and say, it's getting shit, it's getting bad in here. We're still not at that point.
Well, first of all, Derek, never insult Nira. Again, we've talked about this many times.
My
But
my
the, the
my bad.
the second thing is that this is coming, at least to my read, Spencer, and you very well may disagree, and geniuses can disagree. That's okay. This is coming at a moment of weakness for Trump, and I think a general moment of
Yes.
decline for MAGA, broadly speaking. I mean, I think that this is going to be. I mean, the midterms will be the big hinge point, so we'll have to see where those come out. But this does not seem to me like an especially powerful political movement. Derek wants to two finger me.
Well, I do. I think that's salient
One fingered.
because these people know that they're in a moment of weakness. Like they know that something is coming down the pike. They know that Trump is, if you hooked him up to a brainwave scan, who knows what the hell you would see at this point. Like they all know this. Stephen Miller knows this. Seb Gorka knows this. They're trying to get this stuff on paper instantiated now while they still have the ability to do it. I think that gives them a sense of urgency. That's the reason why you're seeing a lot of this stuff happen.
I agree.
I would add that in the background as well, Trump has started the forever war of all forever wars against Iran. This is a moment of tremendous weakness, and even I don't want to predict anything, but like potential backlash. Like if what we saw in Minnesota combined with what we're seeing in just like the sheer economic damage that the Iran war is doing, like dwarfing anything that came out of Iraq and Afghanistan, like really making like Americans feel suffering. In addition to what Derek said about like needing to get this stuff like bureaucratically entrenched so that there's a path to follow for going after the left amongst prosecutors, FBI officials, and how the NSA will submit with the Justice Department surveillance requests before the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, et cetera, certainly ICE. Getting this entrenched in the system so that there's a way of moving this forward for those who will, persist after the Trump administration, just as a matter of like, steady bureaucratic inertia. And in addition to that, this isn't the behavior of people who think their hold on power is strong. It's the position of people who think their hold on power is very, very tenuous, and they need to move to get their prerogatives entrenched with alacrity.
Do you think there's also a limitation here, given the tension between people in the administration who are true believers? Like Stephen Miller is a dead-eyed psycho. He wants this. He wants to punish the left. He wants to enact his ideological project. But the figurehead here at the top is a man who is so venal at this point. He's selling early access to his fucking
Yeah,
social media posts to Wall Street just to make a few extra bucks. Like, he has no ideological leanings here. He's just got his hand out for whatever he can get a hold of. Do you think that that could be a difficulty moving forward, or you could that could is there any tension there that could interrupt what Miller and company are trying to do?
I think you would have, you saw, such tremendous backlash against ICE in Minnesota, and so they got rid of Christy Nome. They retrenched for a couple months under Mark Wayne Mullen, got him in office, and now they're ramping back up again. I think that's kind of a template here. They're just this is an experimental thing, uh, for lack of a better term. Uh, MAGA is, an ideology of action to the extent that it is an ideology at all. It draws from currents in American history and improvises and puts them together, often, trying to declare itself in retrospect to the last thing that Trump has said and find some measure of coherence. But you know it by its deeds, and these are its deeds. This is what it's trying to do. I think only when, I would say this for the war on terror as well, only when it meets some greater political force, even it's Trump's overwhelming sensitivity to the judgment of the financial markets, that can be an impediment. But he's got to meet some impediment before it stops. There's not been a reason that you've seen so far for Stephen Miller to leave. You would have thought in a in prior administrations, what ICE had done in Minnesota would have been enough for a house cleaning. That doesn't work here. I think this is also a situation where, like, that formlessness on the part of Trump can cut in either direction. Like, he can just decide he's bored of this shit right now. He's got Iran to focus on, and this is what Miller and Homan and Gorka can do, and Mullen.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because the two great moments I think of this type of political, eradication occurred right at the end of World War One, between like 1918 and 1920, and then between roughly 48 and 54, with the Democrats initiating it and then McCarthy finishing the job. And I would say in both instances, you had super majoritarian support for that sort of in both instances, communist and socialist causes. And this to me is again like really indicative of the age, not in this issue area, but in general, is that you have these like 20th century frameworks being used in a super divided political moment, when in in American history, broadly speaking, this could always change. You like big things like this succeed when you have like basically every American on your side. You ask the median American, they're like, yes, we should get the communists out of government and the university. And yes, there are all these immigrants in New York. This is the post World War One, and we really should arrest Rosa Luxemburg
Yeah.
or whomever it may be, Emma Goldman, not Rosa Luxemburg. They did her dirty in Germany. So this is like again what I keep on seeing happening in Trump too, is that you have these like grand plans, but without a political moment that enables those types of plans to really succeed, because there's such opposition to him. I do think he's on the way out. And this is why, not that I'm not concerned. I don't want to make that clear, but just trying to like keep a level head. This seems like, again, like another instance of grasping for this thing that they didn't take the time to build up the hegemonic consensus in favor of. And
Yeah,
it's actually quite difficult to do in the United States.
in the same way that there was no like attempt at manufacturing, support for the Iran war. There was, no, you know, I think maybe the exception to this and the reason why they think it can work is precisely because of the extensive ideological residue of precisely what you're talking about: the Red Scare, McCarthyism, fear of socialism, Islamism, as it comes from the now 25-year war on terror, which drew on these important currents from the Cold War. And you can even go back further. I think one of the most American assessments of the Cold War that ever was. You can disagree with me on this, Danny. Was the placard, I want to say, in South Carolina that said race mixing is communism, because it got precisely at how popularly understood this ideology that would upend the social order would play out, even if those things have nothing at all to do with one another. This is not ideology, as it comes out of a book. This is ideology as it comes out of history, as it manifests through action. And I think that's what they're relying on, in the same way that, like, since Trump has been an adult watching the news, Iran has been, some degree of enemy, and you're just sort of relying on, those kinds of, muscle memories to do the work of manufacturing consent. And, like, with things like immigration, that also has an extremely long history that different people can understand in different ways, substituting for some kind of consensus. How durable that is in this day and age, I really wonder about. But I also really wonder about, like, in the kinds of media environments that we live in right now, like, you know what what are the limits of seeking, particularly on the right, mass consents, like mass consensus or mass mobilization. So I don't know, that kind of rambled a bit, but
I mean, this is the whole question of Trump, and I think things are going to be clearer in 2028 when I mean, I don't think he's gonna run again. When the personalism that fueled a lot of this, we'll be able to see to what degree it was personalist, to what degree it reflected lasting currents in American politics. I think we just don't know
yeah.
for a lot of this. I think we live in a clearly ideologically confused moment, which is why I think the macro story of the age is the dissipation of the liberal consensus that has governed since the 30s, broadly speaking, with neoliberalism, I think, being a form of that liberal consensus, just a different valence. And I just don't think we know. But I just think I just don't think it's 1919. I just don't think it's 1952. So I'm very, and this will be indicative, right? Like, do you not need that for this to be a really successful national political program? Or is this just, more Sturm und Drang? I don't know.
And I mean, the other question I would have is what happens. Let's assume that we have an election in 2028, that it's run the way past elections have been run, and Trump is not popular. Whoever runs as his successor likely won't be popular, and the Democrat wins. Is that person going to finally wake up and take the steps that are necessary to dismantle this architecture that's been built over 21, 25 years at this point, that enable this to happen? Are they going to even take the simple step, which the Trump administration is now of opening up to them, of just firing people, like firing all the
Yeah.
political appointees? They're going to worm their way into the what used to be the civil service, because now we're scheduling everybody, or putting everybody in Schedule F so they can be considered at will employees. Are you just going to wholesale fire these people, as you should, or are we going to get some fucking, well, we can't take all these tools apart, or we can't just leave all these agencies without people to run them, like
What are
some
we going to be like
equivocation?
Trump?
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, like, what's going to happen at that point?
You not to not have the cop out answer of, it depends on, like, who this person is, because I don't know, but uh, it is fair to say that there will be a tremendous amount of machinery within, on one hand, the Democratic Party itself, on the other hand, the national security state, to just sort of keep things on an equilibrium or a restoration. And this is precisely what you saw from the Biden administration. This is what you saw to a different degree, but an important degree, from the Obama administration, that like stasis is what matters. That from their perspective, putting the national security apparatus on a more sustainable footprint will be the order of the day, or will be the attempt at the order of the day. I we'll await which Democrat from which coalition will be similarly will be empowered to actually go about running for president. But there's going to be a tremendous amount of internal resistance at multiple stages of this apparatus to not clean house, to not reverse course, and most importantly, not abolish the mechanisms of these things, whose danger could not be more manifest. Right? Like we're past talking about hypothetical lawless men with masks and guns and badges killing people on the street, executing people on the street. There could not be an easier political moment ginned up to say abolish ICE just from the start. This is increasingly a straight, not just a mainstream position, but a mainstream demand. Like the fury against ICE is so genuine. I went to the last No Kings rally, and I were like, grandmothers want to see blood in the streets from ICE agents, like flowing retribution. The Democratic Party is nothing if not adept at missing the moment, nothing but adept at deciding that normalcy ought to prevail rather than attempting to actually solve at the root, solvable social, economic, and political problems, as well military ones. I would imagine that there will also be a great deal of emphasis on any Democrat from the military in making sure that the Iran war continues. And depending on who this is going to be, that could be pushing on an open door. I would like to see a Democrat use the Defense Production Act to start nationalizing the military-industrial complex and doing some defense conversion that will put people to work at union scale and forever transform the economic basis of the American empire into something that can no longer sustain that empire, but ultimately more adequately sustain an American middle class.
I mean, we should have you back on. We've had you on for a while, and it is Friday, as Derek and I call it. But one thing is that I think I would love to have you back to talk about the left and foreign policy, because I think
Yes,
this is once again becoming a live conversation about what your wish list is a good wish list, but it'll be interesting to see what are we talking about here when we look at the various people involved in foreign policy making. So I just wanted to put a pin in that.
definitely. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, stay tuned for that, everybody. That's called foreshadowing. It's how you drive people.
That's right.
It's how you drive the business.
That's engagement.
To get the engagement. But Spencer, yeah, we will leave it here for now, at least. Thank you so much again for coming on the program, folks. Check out Forever Wars. The piece again is "The War on Terror Approaches Its Final Form." The link should be in the show notes. We always appreciate having you on, Spencer.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I always appreciate you having me on.